think this market ultimately is going to be defined by the inability to source product, because it just is not, it is not a market that is flush with product. And, you know, I get a lot of heat for this, but I want to be very clear that, yeah, there's been decent product for the last 3 years, but I will tell you, it is the most difficult part of my job is securing, continually rotating product in and out. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And when that moment comes where people are obviously awoken to precious metals as an alternative, instead of the people that you and I talk to every day who have been enlightened and awoken to this beforehand, who take for granted how easy it is to get it, I think for the other people who come late, even 30 seconds late, it'll be a different story. So yeah, it's an interesting time, and supply chain problems are certainly not immune to this industry. I think the real dent will be made by the commercial banks squeezing the managed money. That, to me, is where the real dent will be made. And if you look at what happened on the London Metals Exchange in March with the nickel failure, this was, I believe, the wake-up call to the commercial banks, because when the nickel market failed and the LME invalidated this trade for the first time in 140 years of their exchange, and I think it really put a damper on the credibility of the LME. I think it woke up the commercial banks, and I think they're trying to get their house in order by incentivizing the managed money through cramming the price down in the beginning of March. The commercials did. And I think the managed money just said, I've had it. We're out. It's 40-year high inflation, war everywhere, a war in the Ukraine, trouble everywhere. The economy's a mess, and yet the price is getting smashed. We're out. So not only did they sell their longs, which the commercial banks gladly gobbled up, they went short. And they're massively short. And who went long? The commercial banks. If you take the producer merchant category out of the commercial category, just the banks themselves are really long. If you add the producers and into the commercial category, which they are, you know, they're still long about 5,100 contracts, over 25 million ounces. I can't ever remember seeing that. So you have the most well-funded, well-informed, sophisticated investors on the planet going net long, I believe, setting a bear trap for the managed money, and it has allowed them, the managed money shorting the price so low has allowed the commercials to cover their shorts. They're doing the dirty work for the commercial banks. The real squeeze will happen on the exchanges. And, you know, I think the real squeeze would happen when this new Moscow exchange that is being bantered about comes about, because all they would have to do, this new Moscow exchange, who, you know, when they came out and talked about it, they said, look, we want to issue an exchange that will fight the manipulation of the West, of the LME and the COMEX. Look, they're not bitching for the last several years because they're the ones accumulating it. So they're using the West's own stupidity against them. The West is suppressing the price, and who's gobbling it all and having it all sent home? The East. This is classic misdirection. They're using the leverage of the West stupidity against us, and by accumulating all the commodities. But once they have everything in hand, then they'll want to set a real benchmark price. Well, that's the new Moscow exchange they're talking about. As far as silver is concerned, you know, what's happening right now on the exchanges is really kind of crazy. We've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of over 1,400 tons that have been taken off of the COMEX market in terms of silver. Silver is just disappearing off the COMEX in a rapid fashion. The open interest right now is 1,500% greater than the registered category. So you have a massive rehypothecation in what silver stocks are available to be delivered on the COMEX. We're seeing metal being bled off the London Metals Exchange at a record pace, so much so that it's the lowest amount of silver in the LBMA vault since they started recording amounts of silver in the vault. There's less than, I believe, 10,000 tons of silver in the LBMA vaults that do not belong to the ETFs. Maybe even more startling than that is the long position on COMEX by the commercial bank, something I've never seen before. the commercial banks are net long right now in silver, and they've hoodwinked the managed money into going net short. So when you see the massive drawdowns on the LBMA, the massive drawdowns on the COMEX, where you're seeing in terms of gold drawdowns, look, a few weeks ago, 41% of all the gold kilo bars were drawn off the COMEX in one day. About 175 million ounces were pulled off the COMEX. And so, you know, you're looking at a situation where the biggest money in the world is draining the COMEX, is draining the LBMA. We've seen 100 million ounces backdoored in the last 4 months out of SLV by the authorized participants. And for the very first time I can remember, last I looked a few days ago, the commercial banks were long about 5,100 COMEX contracts over 25 million ounces. So from the top down, not only is metal being drained from the COMEXs, but you're seeing the most sophisticated investors in the world go net long in silver, which is something I haven't ever seen before. I think it portrays for much higher prices moving ahead, and probably tougher availability as the bars are being taken off of the exchange. Those bars are what actually makes the blanks that make the sovereign coins, which are getting harder to get too, especially since the Queen died, all of a sudden getting even harder to get. This shows the micro fragility of the market. And when I mean micro, I have long felt that from a macro perspective, getting product will ultimately be very difficult in this industry, because Rick Rule talks about 0.5% allocation to precious metals across the entire financial matrix. So if that number changes to 2.5%, which coincidentally would only be the 40-year mean of the price or the allocation rather of metals to the U.S. portfolio, that's a five-fold increase in demand when this industry can hardly handle the demand that we have right now. It will make getting product next to impossible. And I have felt for a very long time there will be this moment where people are awoken. Now, I could argue that there's been a much greater participation and awakening, if you will, from the mainstream into this industry, but it still represents but the pimple on the elephant's ass. And that's the truth. The big money has no idea about silver and gold yet. Maybe they're beginning to understand that there's something not right in the economy, but when they see their 401k collapse, when they see their equity portfolio collapse for whatever that reason may be that incites that or ignites that precipitous decline, they have to come out and notice precious metals. And when that moment happens, there's so much liquidity out there, there's so much money that's been created that it will just overwhelm this industry.